Hello and welcome back, adventurers. Sit back, get comfy, and let me tell you about the past of Nova Vaasa. According to the history as they know it, Nova Vaasans are descended from a people called the Old Wassens. The Old Wassens were taller and cruder people than Nova Vaasans of today. They lived a difficult life as cattle ranchers and fur trappers amidst the harsh, frozen flatlands of a region known simply as Vaasa, situated in the north of a vast continent of an outlander world of forgotten realms. The Old Wassens did not begin as a united people, instead being divided into 5 major and numerous minor clans, each alternating in cooperation and competition with their neighbors. This changed with the rise to power of one man who saw beyond the frozen hills and fields of mud. He is remembered today as Hochplatz. After coming into power over the Bolshevik tribe, he managed to rally the other 4 major clans to his vision of conquest. The Vasi timeline begins with this date, the unification of the Vasi nation. With the unification begins the epoch known as the Ranging. With the major tribes united in alliance, the minor clans quickly fell into place beside them, and the Old Wassens went to war. They began by invading the neighboring land of Denmark, towards which they had long cast jealous eyes. The war for Denmark proved difficult and costly, lasting many years, but Hochplatz turned the tide. He cast his eyes upward and pleaded with the heavens, and his god, the lawgiver, answered. The earth crackled open, and hordes of creatures from hell of slaves burst forth, sweeping Denmark armies aside and flowing back into the chasm from which they came. The Old Wassens proved to be savage warriors when compared to their neighbors, and the ferocity of their attacks together with Hochplatz's ability to command divine intervention made victory a simple matter. The eastern lands were the most troublesome for the Old Wassens. Some of the peoples of the east commanded powerful magic, something with which Old Wassens had little experience. Others were savage warriors themselves, unwilling to give a foot of land without first marking it with Vasi corpse. Interestingly, one of the conquered southern lands is written off as a land of painted warlocks and foul treachery. One cannot help but be reminded of Haslan, but Haslani do not admit to any such war, much less conquest in their past. Another of these fallen eastern lands was of particular import. Once known as Tigam, it could not have been more dissimilar from Vaasa, being a land of arid, grass-covered plains, well suited for raising and ranging of horses. The Tigami were masterful horsemen, and the conquest of them was dearly won, but it paid handsome dividends, and Tigam became a jewel in the Vasi crown. Of great interest to the Old Wassens were the horses of Tigam, which proved strong and swift, clever and tireless. The Tigami had not traded their horses with others, holding them in too much reverence to allow such demeaning activity. The Old Wassens saw the profit to be made from them and began seizing and breeding them. Hochplatz declared the Tigami city of Kantora his new capital. Tigam was henceforth known as newly chosen Vaasa, a name that was commonly shortened to Nova Vaasa. The heads of the other 4 major clans joined him in settling here. The rest of the now Vaasan Empire was divided into spheres of influence, with each of the major tribes and many of the minor tribes claiming a share. Sadly, the Old Wassens knew far less of rulership than of conquest, and the decision of Hochplatz to hold court far from the center of his empire would eventually lead to the empire's dissolution. The empire held until Hochplatz's death, thus ending the Ranging epoch and beginning the Breaking. After his death by Hochplatz's standing decree, rulership of the realm would be alternated between the heads of the 5 clans, in what he termed the ordained cycle of stewardship. While this did much to stabilize Nova Vaasa where the chiefs held court, it did little for more distant lands, which soon began to rise up in rebellion. After a considerable time, the last territory outside Nova Vaasa free of its yoke, ending the Breaking and beginning the epoch known as the Settling. This was a period of calm and regrouping, as the people of this orphaned kingdom struggled to find their own identity. Losing the connection with their roots, noble clans tried to strengthen themselves with the blood of the Tigami. The rise of the Church of the Lawgiver stands as the most significant event of the bridling age. Prior to the conquest of the Old Wassens, the Church of the Lawgiver struggled as the marginal religion in Tigam. The Old Wassens, beginning of course with Hochplatz, had encouraged the Lawgiver's Church for its message of submission to those in power, suited the conquerors quite well. The church thus began a period of steady growth, but it was not until the reign of Prince Gorkin Vistin began that it truly came into its full influence. Gorkin brutally stamped out other religions, turning their lands, properties and incomes over to the Church of the Lawgiver. High-ranking members of the Lawgiver clergy received military and civil offices, and the church was freed from all taxes. When his reign was ending, Prince Gorkin then did what no previous prince had done. He refused to give up power, claiming that his divine mission was not yet fulfilled. With the church and his family backing him, the other patriarchs were forced to fall in line. A short time later, Prince Gorkin declared that as the prince of the realm, he was also by right head of the church. Calling himself the Divine Fist, he then led Nova Vaasa in series of holy wars with their neighbors, remembered today as the Wars on Conversion. Unfortunately, Prince Gorkin was overly ambitious, and his wars of conversion did little more than drain the kingdom's resources. With his death, the cycle of stewardship resumed, and the Church of the Lawgiver continued with its strength only marginally diminished. Much later in winter, during the final reign of Prince Ingemar Bolshnik, the skies over Nova Vaasa reportedly darkened, the earth shook, and a terrifying thunder echoed through the air. In what the Church of the Lawgiver dubbed the Second Judgment, Nova Vaasans claimed their homeland was wrenched from its proper world and cast into hell. Barovian records first show trading with the Horse Lords of the East in 682 Barovian calendar, and this is the date generally accepted for Nova Vaasa's appearance in the core. The most significant event with Nova Vaasa since the Second Judgment has been the rise to power of Prince Ofmar Bolshnik. Some say it was orchestrated by the current prince while he was only in line for succession. Ofmar has held the title since 729, almost 30 years, giving him the tightest grip on power in Nova Vaasa. Ofmar has proven to be a harsh taskmaster, imposing tax after tax on his subjects and ruthlessly suppressing all dissent. A second event worthy of attention had been the rise of another individual to the power of different sort. In 717, long before Prince Ofmar's reign commenced, a religious movement began in Nova Vaasa. Calling themselves the Claws of Sekma and claiming to be priests of the ancient cat god, the Claws seemingly dedicated themselves to easing the plight of the poor and disenfranchised in Nova Vaasa. The Claws became powerful, wealthy, and respected, and their high priest, who called himself Malkin, became a figure of awe and reverence, though he was never seen. Sir Tristan Highguard, at the time captain of Kantora City Guard, soon uncovered the sinister truth behind the Claws of Sekma. They were not priests at all, but were in truth a widespread criminal organization. Malkin himself ruled at the center of his criminal web, and Sir Tristan made it his mission to oppose Malkin and bring him to justice, as he found out the criminal to be his own father. By the end of the year, he had largely succeeded. The claws were broken, the worship of Sekma outlawed, and Malkin himself was believed to be killed by Sir Tristan's own hand. Finally, I come to the signature killer, who has perhaps done more to shape life in cities of Nova Vaasa in the last 70 years than any prince or would-be crime master could claim. Striking mostly in Liara in recent years, but also in Kantora and rarely in Bergovica, a madman has been intermittently stalking the women of the lower classes, killing and mutilating them, and leaving the remains for the city guard to find. Fortunately, the killings have slowed since the first began in 682 Barovian calendar, to about 1 or sometimes 2 a year. Still, that leaves the killer with over 100 murders to his credit. One thing seems to come up when looking into the signature killer, or should I say Malkin. I noticed that Highguard family always seems to visit the cities when the murder occurs. Thank you so much for your time, precious listeners. Nova Vaasan history is full of blood and suffering of those not blessed by birth. And if your own heart is kind to those in need, be careful while crossing the mists.